man, look at that. On a rainy spring evening, a family, a father, a mother, daughter, and a son, they all sit around a table eating dinner in their house. Actually, it wasn't raining. There was a torrential rainstorm passing by. And actually, they weren't in a house, at least not a house that was completed. You see, this family was living in the basement of a home that was still being built. The foundation had been set, the wood structure had been raised, but the bricks were still being laid. This family was doing their best to ignore the uncontrollable weather as they share their meal when all of a sudden they hear a deep, resounding crunch, and another, and another. Before they get a chance to enjoy the few seconds of dampened silence, a slab of drywall crashes down from the ceiling in front of what the family called a living room, forming a ramp on which rainwater begins to gush down. The same thing happens by the little boy's bed in the corner of the basement. And again, this time barely missing the mother by a few feet. Before they knew it, their home was inches deep in water, and they were forced to grab a few essential possessions and leave their home. The father picks up the boy in one hand. The mother holds her daughter's hand as they all run into their used minivan. As the car door shuts, the rain continues to hammer down on the car, and the sound of thunder occasionally interrupts the wailing wind. But the only thing that this boy could hear were the sounds of his parents' held back tears as they experienced what they thought was rock bottom. Good morning, Taft. Last time I was on stage, I think I looked a little bit more something like this. Unfortunately, I am not here to give you a performance of Psy's latest song, but on a related note, I'd like to start off with an obvious fact. I'm Asian. More specifically, I'm a second-generation Korean American, meaning that my parents were immigrants from South Korea. Now, I'm not here to shed light on immigration reform in America, nor to change your mind on immigration policy. In fact, I'm not even going to try and give you some sort of a feel-good message at the end or give you some sort of advice. I'm simply here to tell you a story that you might not be familiar with. You see, last summer I read an article in the New York Magazine written by Wesley Yang. Wesley Yang is a Korean-American man like me, except that he calls himself a banana because he is yellow on the outside but white on the inside. Now, I want you to remember the name Wesley Yang. He is a man who calls the Asian American population of America a mass of stifled, repressed, abused, conformist quasi-robots who simply do not matter socially or culturally. He blames this largely on the parental style of immigrant parents and puts forth the question, how do you undo 18 years of a Chinese upbringing? Well, let me tell you first about my immigrant parents. My father first came to America in 1981 to get a degree in nuclear engineering at the University of Detroit. He came by himself, leaving behind my mother, my one-year-old sister, hoping to see if America would be a suitable place to make a better living and raise a family. A year later, my mother and sister arrived in the States, and the three of them lived in my father's dorm room. After a while, my parents made the tough decision of sending my sister back to Korea to be raised by my relatives because my parents could not support her while my father was studying, let alone in an environment where they could not even speak the same language as everyone else. My sister rejoined my parents in Detroit when she was about 3 years old, when one of my father's friends informed the school and immigration services that there were 2 people living with my father illegally. They fled, and they left for Brooklyn, New York, where they knew another immigrant family from South Korea. After a few years, my parents were somewhat settled in Brooklyn, and they found work at a jeweler's shop. It was owned by an American man who gave my parents a passable wage for them to live and support their child. One evening, the owner goes to my father and says he's got a special job for him. He wanted my father to break into another jewelry store and steal for him. When my father said that he wouldn't, this man took out a gun and forced my father to get in a car with him. They drove out toward an isolated area while my father was held at gunpoint. When the car finally stopped, my father immediately tried to wrestle the gun out of his boss's hand, doing everything that he could to stay alive. 2 shots were fired. One grazed my father's nose, the other grazed the back of his neck. When he finally pulled the gun out of this man's hand, my father unlocked the car and ran out of the car as fast as he could. At that exact point in time, somehow, a police car was casually patrolling the neighborhood when they saw a man in the street whose face was completely covered in blood, frantically waving his arms, trying to get their attention. Fast forward about 10 years. The story that I started with at the beginning of this talk happened when I was in 3rd grade. We left our flooded basement and we went to my father's construction warehouse, where you might find a set of folded scaffolding, a couple of Caterpillar trucks, and a bunch of other tools. I can still remember the look in my parents' eyes and the tone of their voice as they introduced our new home for the next couple of months. We eventually moved into a small 2-family home that we rented. Growing up, both of my parents worked until 7 or 8 p.m. My sister, she went to school in Manhattan, and she would get back around 6 p.m., and I would come home the earliest. Eat a frozen TV dinner, a couple of Hot Pockets, stay home by myself until everyone was home. And when everyone was back, dinner was sacred. It was the only time when my parents could actually raise their kids. It was the only time when they could actually find out about their day and maybe even still try and instill something valuable and important. So going back to Wesley Yang, I'd like to read an excerpt from the article that he wrote in the New York Magazine. Now, unfortunately, this quote is rather vulgar, so I've decided to replace a word that Wesley continually uses with a completely innocuous word that may or may not rhyme with the word that Wesley actually uses. This word is truck. Here's what Wesley has to say. Let me summarize my feelings toward Asian values. Truck filial piety. Truck deference to authority. Truck humility and hard work. Truck harmonious relations. Truck sacrificing for the future. Truck earnest striving, middle-class servility. Having thought about this quote and the rest of this article, I have 3 things to say in response to Wesley Yang. Actually, you know what? I have 4, because the first thing I like to say is, you know what, Wesley? Truck you, all right? I'm sorry. What you just said was immature and offensive, so I'm going to be immature and offensive for 1 hot second and say, truck you, Wesley. And now, here are my 3 more mature and educated responses. First, Wesley is creating a fixed ethnic experience for 2nd-generation Asian Americans. He claims that they are bound by these values, and as a result, it leads to outstanding secondary school achievement, but it inevitably paralyzes you for life thereafter. While there's much evidence that charts the fine academic achievement of Asian Americans, Wesley also fails to reveal the increasing number of Asian Americans who are failing and dropping out of high school. In 2004, among the 513,000 Asian American high school students in the nation, an estimated 25,000 dropped out of high school. In New York City alone, the dropout rate for Asian Americans has steadily risen from 8% in 1997 to 12.2% in 2002. While many Asian American families may have a similar cultural feel, you cannot simply make the argument that all Asians are smart. Also, are we really calling these Asian values? Filial piety? Harmonious relations? Hard work? What are these, foreign concepts to white people? Come on. It's like when I walk into the dining hall and I read the label for a dish that says Asian noodles. And I look around and I'm like, what is it about these noodles that are Asian? Are these carrots chopped by hand and shipped from Vietnam? Are these noodles hand-drawn by an old man from China? Come on. They're values. They're not Asian values. Some families emphasize them, and some do not. Actually, I really like those Asian noodles, so don't think I'm bashing on them. Second, we need to understand where immigrant parents are coming from and why these values are so important to them. My parents came to America to pursue the American dream. What is the American dream? It's the idea that hard work leads to success. Well, the bitter and unfortunate truth for my parents and many other parents like mine is that for them, hard work might lead to success. Now, don't get me wrong, because we all know that life is full of uncertainties, regardless of your situation. But for my parents and many other immigrant parents, that is an understatement. In a world where the very roof that is over your head and the bed that you sleep on is not guaranteed, the one thing that my parents felt like they needed to ensure was something better for their own child. Lastly, Wesley also argues in his article that it is a part of the bitter undercurrent of Asian American life that meritocracy comes to an abrupt end after graduation. He says that Asian Americans have repeatedly failed to become leaders in the workplace. Well, let's analyze that. After the Immigration and Nationalization Act of 1965, immigration from Asia has increased exponentially, especially in the 70s and 80s. And if those families were all to have children around that time, those kids would primarily be in their 30s and 40s now. My point is, the current generation of Asian Americans is just starting to bloom right now. Grace Meng, age 37, is New York's first Asian American congresswoman. Jerry Yang, age 44, is the co-founder and former CEO of Yahoo! Michelle Kwan, age 32, figure skater and two-time Olympic medalist and a five-time world champion. Ken Chung, whom you all know, age 43, a Korean-American actor most notable for his performances in The Hangover. Jim Young Kim, my favorite, age 53, co-founder of Partners in Health, former president of Dartmouth College, and the current president of the World Bank, appointed by President Obama. The list goes on. And if you think you're impressed right now, you haven't even seen me. That's right. Wesley, I'm gonna be somebody. Probably won't ever know who I am, but I'm gonna be somebody. No, not in spite of the way my parents raised me, but because of the way my parents raised me. And you know what? I know I said earlier that I wasn't gonna try and leave you with some sort of cheesy message, but I'm gonna. First of all, don't be a Wesley Yang. What I mean by that is don't criticize and judge and create labels for people before you understand what they're all about. When we do this, we create unnecessary pain and damage, whether it was intentional or not. Rather, my hope is that we can be a community that does it the other way around. While I think good criticism is necessary for improvement, it needs to be contextualized by sound understanding and open-mindedness. When we do this, we are creating an environment where people can build and construct one another, and we can live lives that actually better someone else's. The second thing I'd like to say is a message that you have all heard many times before, but one that I feel is that much more important that I emphasize. Work hard. Now, I know this seems contradictory because I just told you the story of a family that met defeat after defeat despite all their efforts. But even though hard work might not always lead to immediate success, it definitely builds character. In all my life, I have never met anyone as unwavering, as honest, and as self-sacrificing as my parents. After 30 years of living in America, my parents are now homeowners. They own their own small business. Despite financial difficulties in the past, they've raised 2 successful kids. One is a doctor at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, and the other is, well, you know. My point is, hard work does pay off. When I think about where my parents were when they first came to the States and where they are now, I'm forced to believe that hard work does lead to success. It might take 3 days. It might take 3 weeks. It might even take 3 years. But I promise you, if you strive, if you can endure through hardship, and if you are diligent with all the little things, I promise it'll be worth it. Thank you very much.